The more I talk to people, the more I realize the year 2024 was a very big year for a lot of people. It brought a lot of change. It brought a lot of awareness. It brought a lot of transformation. Brought a lot of destruction, things that you were used to going away. And it was the biggest year, most painful year, and brought the most change that I've ever experienced in my entire life. And with that, it brought a lot of lessons. It brought a lot of awareness and it brought a lot of growth. And I wanted to share those lessons with you inside of this episode. And I brought on a co-host to help me navigate this episode. And it was one of the longest and what I think is one of the most powerful episodes that I've ever had on the podcast. It's an hour and 40 minutes long, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, I'm Brandon Lucero, and you're about to experience the new way to thrive in business, entrepreneurship, and life by leaning into who you are, what you love, and standing up for what you want to create. Get ready, because this is where we go against the grain, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to change in order to create a happier, more fulfilled world. Welcome to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the biggest episode we've ever done on this podcast, or at least number two. We've done a couple of big episodes, but it is a big episode. And, it's been a while since I've been nervous going into an episode. I'm actually nervous for this one. And so we'll see where it takes us. And I am excited to get into it. We're going to be diving into a lot of the lessons that I had learned and experienced in 2024. We'll see if I can make it through this episode without crying. It's been a very tough year. This has been by far the hardest, toughest, most painful year of my entire life. And with that comes a lot of beauty in the form of lessons. And so what I wanted to do is break down and walk you through and have an amazing conversation about the lessons that I learned this year. And so with that being said, I know because I released the podcast episodes out of order, and I kind of let the cat out of the bag. But this year, one of the biggest things that had happened to me is I ended up getting or going through a divorce. And so this episode will not be about my divorce. It will not be about my relationship, and I will not be doing a podcast episode about that. And that is a very strong boundary that I'm going to keep. And that's the boundary of my private life. And even if I wanted to come on and talk about it, it's not fair, because if I was to sit here and tell my side of what had happened, even though it may be true to me, it is not going to be the truth, because it's a one-sided opinion. And to be honest with you guys, it is not anyone else's business what happened besides mine and my family's. But with that being said, one of the people who has helped me probably the most throughout the entire process is Rachel, who I've invited on to be my co-host of this episode. And one of the reasons why I wanted to bring Rachel on is because Rachel has done a very good job not only helping me fight for my marriage, but also telling me when my perspective was off, telling me where I was maybe not looking at things right, and holding a very neutral ground. It's very easy when you go through hard times to get a lot of yes people telling you, yep, you're right, that person, blah, 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 blah. And Rachel actually did the opposite. I actually think Rachel may have taken everyone else's side more than mine during this, but it was great because it really allowed me to have a deeper understanding of what was going on and hold a lot more compassion than I would have. And so, Rachel, I'm very grateful for you. And I just wanted to say thank you for all the help and support this year. And not only just the help and support, but allowing me to see things from a perspective I would have never seen without you, and to give everyone that I had issues with or was battling in quotes this year, you gave them a voice when I wasn't talking to them. And that was very impactful for me. So I appreciate it. And I'm very excited for our conversation today. So welcome back to the podcast episode.
Thank you for having me. And also, you didn't warn me that I should have put on the waterproof mascara.
I have never seen you cry, Rachel, so
That is so not true.
I still don't believe you can. And also, I'm disappointed you don't have a glass of wine with me, because this is a night episode. If you're on YouTube watching, you can tell the lighting for me is a little weird, but whatever. So
yes, I feel utterly unprepared. Not only do I not have waterproof mascara, I also don't have a glass of wine. However, thank you for what you said. And I just want to say one thing about this, that experience you had, that I gave a voice to other people. There are, maybe this is the first lesson that I wonder if this is in your mind a lesson. There are no sides. There are no sides. There is no your side, someone else's side, multiple people's sides. There are no sides. And for me, when I listen to you, or when I listen to anyone talk about their experience, I realize that there's a part that's having an experience, but there are other parts to that experience. And really all I ever aim to do is just allow us all to see different aspects of our own experience. Not someone else's experience necessarily. It's of your experience. Does that make sense?
yes, I think so. So I'm going to ask a question, dive deeper, and I was not planning on going here, but let's do it. And so, through everything that I was going through, because, I don't think that the audience, you guys, basically, I'll just give you a small glimpse of some of the items that I had to go through. And a lot of them were all happening at the same time. And the first one was obviously the divorce, which it was the most emotionally painful experience I've ever gone through in my entire life. It was like my soul got split in half. And, it was really rough. But at the same time, I got diagnosed with a couple autoimmune things and a couple other things this year as well. I got hit by a car while riding my bike and broke my wrist and my thumb. I got attacked by a dog on that same ride. We had, some legal issues inside of the business that were not fun. We had some pretty scary months in the business because I was I gave the business 100% of what I had, and that wasn't a lot. And you and Matt and the team, Julie and Jesse and Brittany, really, you guys carried me through. You carried the business through. But there was, scary months there. We had deaths in the family that were all happening at the same time. I moved also from Arizona back to California. Near-death experiences with my dad getting in an accident. We weren't sure if he was going to make it. And there's probably more, but all of these things are all happening at once. And I remember just being so overloaded with that. But my conversations with you, and bringing this back to experience, I think I actually need you to clarify a little bit more, because the way I felt you helping was that you understood what my reality was and what my experience was. But at the same time, you and I both had the awareness to know that whatever I was experiencing was just my experience and nobody else's. And sometimes when you're so deep into the emotions in your experience, it's very hard to separate your experience from reality and truth. And what you helped me do was tap into Jacqueline's reality and what she was experiencing. And you allowed me to live in that and sit in that. And I'm not sure, is that what you're saying, or are you saying something a little bit differently? Because that was one of the biggest blessings that I was able to do, is just to understand where she was coming from. And it allowed me to show up in a way that I was very proud of. But I'm not sure if that's what you were saying or not.
So to clarify, and maybe just to give kind of the audience a little bit of understanding of why you even talk to me about stuff like this, is because I used to be, besides the fact that, we work together and we're good friends, but also I used to be a divorce attorney, and I've seen thousands of divorces. including my own, by the way. I got a divorce 20 years ago. So like, I really know, I understand the dynamics inside of a couple and inside of a marriage. And when that falls apart, I also understand from thousands of people's experience, the aftermath of that and the different cycles we go through. So there's that part of my background. But when you say that I helped you understand where Jacqueline was coming from, I didn't really, because it's not like I was talking to Jacqueline and I know what Jacqueline is feeling. I don't. I was just helping you see there are multiple aspects to a certain reality. And you had one, and I was giving another. And for all I know, Jacqueline would have come into the conversation and said, yeah, I don't feel any of that. I feel something completely different. Because I don't know what she's feeling. I genuinely don't. How would I? Only she does, right? And only someone else knows what they're going through. So I would never presume to know what someone else is experiencing unless they told me. But in this case, all I was trying to do was hypothesize what could be based on my experience, based on, what I do know of Jacqueline, based on what I know of you. It was more for you to see that you were in a perspective.
And I would say that's exactly what happened is, there were times when you would say like, well, here's what you're saying and here's what you're experiencing. And, but based off of what I'm hearing, do you understand how someone else might be experiencing what you're saying? And, that was a very soft way of calling me out and saying, in other words, the way I'm looking at it is, in other words, it was a very soft way of saying like, dude, you might be a little off on this one here. Like you may not be seeing how someone else is feeling because of what you're doing here. And just having that acknowledgement of, or having the chance to snap me out of the fucking cycle that my head was going through, to snap me out and to realize like, you might be spiraling a little bit and it is definitely affecting the people around you and you need to knock it off. Like, you're not in those words, but it's not even knock it off. It's more of like, you need to understand how this might be hurting other people if you want to, if you choose to. And that was a gift that I had during this whole experience was I think you helped me find, a lot more compassion and empathy for the people that were around me or the people that I were talking to. And it's not just Jacqueline. It's like even people on the team, like we had a lot of team changes this year too. And it's like, I think we all want to think that we're doing everything right and we're doing everything good and treating people great. But then sometimes ego takes over and sometimes arrogance takes over. And sometimes you're just righteous.
We're human, right?
And you don't really understand the hurt that you're bringing. And I think let's just go here because I think this is one of the lessons that I wrote down is that I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned was that, was about hurt. And what it was like, it doesn't matter what your intention was. It doesn't matter your perspective on something. If someone is interacting with you on some level and they feel hurt, nothing else matters. Nothing else fucking matters. Like if I do something and it was not intentional or my thought was in the right place and I did something and it brought hurt to the other person wants to feel safe and acknowledged and validated. And when you fight for your truth and say, this is my truth and that wasn't my intention, and that all it does is it furthers the hurt. And I had to really look at myself and get out of my ego in a lot of times. And what I had to do was just put what I thought, I found myself defending myself all the time. And like, I didn't do that and da-da-da-da-da-da. And none of that matters because the other person was hurt by what you did, no matter the intention. And sometimes good intentions still hurt people. And you don't have to do anything, but in order to heal and repair anything, a relationship with anyone, friends, whatever, you have to get out of that ego side and acknowledge shit.
Right. And that exactly what you just said is the difference between wisdom and being right. Because being right doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's no wisdom that goes along with it. So you can know that you're right, so to speak, right? You can, and I'm saying this with, quotation marks. You can know that you're right. You can know your own truth. You can stand firm in that, and you can have the wisdom to stop fighting for it. And even allowing someone else to think something about you that is not true, or to think something about you that is bad, or that casts you in a poor light. And to be able to allow that to exist out there in the ether, that somebody thinks I'm bad. Somebody thinks I'm wrong. Somebody thinks I'm mean, whatever it is. And being okay with that hanging out there in the world while you are firmly grounded in your own truth, I think that is a very powerful position to be in as a human being.
Yeah. And I had to learn that lesson because I was fighting for what I thought was right. And I was fighting for, and again, this isn't even just about my relationship. This is just about, that's just how I was interacting with a lot of people, even like my kids. And so, sometimes like we might walk into the room and see a messy room and yell at them, like, clean up the room. And we're like, might think as a parent, we're right because they didn't listen and blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't matter if they took that as a shock and took that as a hurt. You just hurt your kid. And if you don't acknowledge that, it destroys the relationship.
Yes, because there's your intention and there's your impact, and you can't ignore your impact, no matter your intention.
Yes.
So
I love that.
You get to say, in certain relationships, you can say, all I care about is my intention. Whatever impact that might have had on someone, you could say, I don't care about that. But inside of your family, for sure, and inside of your friends and your team, you do care. You care your impact. So even if you had only good intentions, which I know you do, when you have a negative impact on someone, you got to take a look at that. And then you can say, okay, maybe there are some things I can change about how I communicate. I can change about my behavior. I can change about my delivery so that I don't have this negative impact that I didn't intend to have, because I care about this person and I care about this relationship.
Well, I think it also, when you do that and you stop looking at your intention and you look more at the impact. I've experienced that you just have much more empathy and compassion for that person. And I would feel a deeper amount of love for that person as well. And like, I can sit here and honestly say that everyone that I've interacted with this year, including Jacqueline or my kids or people, and if I had a tiff or a fight or whatever with them, and, especially Jacqueline, I still hold so much respect and love, honestly, on levels that I never have before, because I was able to understand the hurt that I had brought, and I was able to understand why it hurt them. And the why it hurt them could be a number of different reasons. And again, I'm not talking about anyone specifically here, but it could be because of past childhood traumas. It could be because of past experiences. It could be, but that was, that kind of moves me into the next lesson, which is about being very curious. And instead of trying to be right, we want to get curious. Why did that hurt you? Why do you respond in that way? What was your childhood like? And I can honestly sit here and say, I've been with Jacqueline since I was 16 years old. And so this whole experience has been so soul crushing for me for a lot of different reasons, but dreams went away that I've had since I was, a kid, but most identity was stripped away. I built my brand off of being a father and a husband, and that got shattered this year. And so, during that experience, I've been able and understanding, and then same thing with my kids. I understand my kids better because I understand I might do something to one of my kids and I might do the exact same thing to another kid. One of them experiences it hurt, the other one doesn't. But until you get curious as to why that affected them that way, or why did it affect this person way, you don't really understand how that person operates. And when you get curious, you can really understand how that person operates, and you can improve your messaging. You can improve your communication. But not only that, what I also experienced was that it calmed me down. That I understand, that's why.
Why did it calm you down?
It calmed me down because I understood why they reacted or the way that they did. And I'll just give an example. Like if I go into the room and my son is playing with Legos and I say, clean up your Legos, and it affects him, and I get curious as to why it affects him and all of this stuff. Now I know how he operates. So if he flips out, I can now go, I did that thing and that triggered him. And instead of me being reactive to him, it allows me to stay grounded.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yes.
I feel like I'm not giving you the answer I want. So do you want to just expand on it?
No, it's not the answer I want. It's that when that happens, what you just said, so when someone reacts in a certain way, and instead of us reacting back, we get curious, we start uncovering why they behave the way they behave. Yes, it allows us to have compassion for them, but also it allows us to understand ourselves.
Oh, interesting. Expand.
So when Will gets triggered by something and he blows up, right? Like everybody, any parent has been in this situation. Their child, something flips their lid. Half the time you don't even know what it is. It's like you got the wrong color cup. They flip their lid. Instead of us reacting to that with more force, because we can overpower our children. Instead of doing that, when we get curious about, okay, what was it truly that made you flip your lid? Because I told you what to do, because I tried to control you, because you feel like, what is it on a slightly deeper level than just what color cup was it, right? When we have that, when we can reach those levels of understanding of our children, we can have more compassion for them, but also for ourselves when that happens to us, because it happens to us too. We get triggered by the exact same things our children get triggered. We get triggered when we lose control. We get triggered when we feel unheard. We get triggered when we feel not important, when we're hurt, right? All humans get triggered by the same things. It just, when you're a kid, it's a different example than when you're a grown-up. But this allows us to understand ourselves better. And when we can have compassion for ourselves, it's a loop. The more compassion, understanding, acceptance I have of myself, the more I can give that to those around me.
You can't give what you don't have. And that's the same thing. If you want a relationship of depth, you want a relationship of vulnerability, you want a relationship of honesty, you want a relationship of all these things. And you can't be honest with yourself. You can't be who you are. You can't be vulnerable. You don't know who you are. There's a limit on how deep you can go inside of the relationship or the friendship or whatever it may be.
And now I'm going to tie this back to what you said earlier, that I wasn't the yes man. I am the yes man. I was and am and will be in the service of Brandon. And why I brought other perspectives was for you to know yourself. It's not to defend other people.
Mind blown. I didn't realize that, but that was one of my biggest lessons, was about learning more about who I was and how I am and how I react and all of that stuff. But it was also a big lesson in also self-love and self-love in the way of like, I just, for a lot of different reasons, bent and lost who I was and didn't stand up for who I was. And it caused problems. I mean, it's always going to cause a problem. It caused problems in multiple areas, in the business and my relationships with friends, and obviously in my family and a lot of that type of stuff. And so the lesson in self-love was really big. And it's honestly, it's still a lesson I'm still learning. It feels it feels very uncomfortable for me to really focus on myself, because for the longest time, I focused on the business and my family and providing for them and giving them the life that I wanted them to have. And like, and you guys, the team and all of these things, where it was like, what was left over for Brandon at the end of the day? It was like, there wasn't really much, and I didn't get to enjoy the things that were me as much as I had wanted to. And I just had to learn this big lesson in self-love this year as well. And I still do. I mean, it feels uncomfortable for me.
It's ongoing.
Yeah. So I don't know. I still need to learn that lesson, I guess. But yeah, so that was a big lesson. And it also, leads me to one of the next lessons that I learned this year. Which this might be a trigger for some of the audience members. So I don't mean it that way if you guys take it this way. But, if you are someone who understands the value of self-responsibility, this will make a lot of sense to you. And basically what this is if someone shuts down, runs away, lies to you, doesn't tell you the truth, it's because you did not create a safe enough space for them to be vulnerable. And so if you're in a relationship with someone, or you have a friendship, or your kids, for example, are lying to you, it's because they do not feel safe enough to tell you the truth. And that is 100% your responsibility. If you want someone to be vulnerable with you, if you want someone to be truthful with you, if you want someone to let you into the depths of their inner world, you need to create the space for them to feel safe enough to do that.
I'll just add one asterisk there.
Yes.
Everything you said about kids, 100%. When it comes to adults, you can do everything in the world to create a safe environment, and someone will still not open up because of their stuff.
Yes. True. Yep. 100%. I experienced this with even my kids this summer, or during this, like the process of moving and stuff, where I noticed one of my kids was starting to lie, like blatantly lie. And I was just like, I watched you. I watched you do it. Like, that I know you're lying, but you're still doing it. And then all I walked up and did was just like, gave them a hug. And I just said, you're not in trouble. It is safe. You're 100% safe right now. But you can tell me the truth and you won't be in trouble. And I got you and I'm here for you. And then instantly the truth comes out. And it was safe. They weren't in trouble. They weren't whatever. And I said, you're always safe with me. Like, you can always just tell me the truth and blah, 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 blah. And obviously I'm a parent and I'm a human. So like, I mess up on that front from time to time. But what I've realized is, I guess another way to say this when it comes to adults is that if an adult isn't opening up or an adult is lying and you want to go to the depths with them, they will never go to the depths with you if the space does not feel safe. I think is a better way to say that.
Yes.
Makes sense?
100%.
Okay.
100%.
Awesome. Anything to add to that one, or is that one like wrapped up with a nice little bow?
I think that one is, for me, it is wrapped up with a nice bow. I think it's hard to digest that one because if someone lies, your instinct is to say, they did something wrong, right? Lying's not okay. It's not okay in a relationship. It's not part of a healthy relationship, right? And that's on them. It's not on me. How is that on me, right? So I think if anyone is listening and struggling a little bit with this concept, it's, maybe a more generalized version of this is we co-create our relationships. So if you are in a relationship where someone is lying, I'm not defending the lie. It's not okay to lie. But I am saying, and you're saying, we have to take accountability for the entire relationship. Each party in the relationship, the way I see relationships, each one of us is accountable 100%, not 50.
Yeah. And I guess I can go back and correct that, because what I didn't want to, hopefully it didn't come off as me justifying lying being okay, because it's not. And so, the person who's lying also needs to be accountable that they just didn't tell the truth. At the same time, it's a dance, a relationship, a dance. And, like, I'm not saying that this happened, but like, let's just say I was in a relationship with someone and they lied about something. My first response used to be like, why did you do that? Blah, 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 blah. But now where I'm at is, what did I do to cause them to feel like they needed to lie to me? Like, do I overreact? Do I turn things on them? Do I do, like, what did I do that played a role in them wanting to do that?
Right. And again, to clarify, you might not have done anything wrong, right? And certainly not on purpose. Back to intention versus impact, right? You certainly don't intend, I don't think any of us intend to create unsafe spaces in our relationships.
But this is also just like, it's such a foreign topic as well. Like, this whole thing is, one of the biggest things I realized is, like, I went through different phases of anger, different things. And one of the places that I held a lot of anger, which I thought was really interesting, was like at society. Like, why the hell do they not teach emotional intelligence? Why don't they teach that in schools? Why don't they teach you what a safe space is and what vulnerability means? And why don't they teach any of this stuff? I
think they do more. They do. Like, you and I never learned that, and I'm sure none of our listeners have.
I don't think the public
they do more.
Going to teach it.
I think they teach. I think today children, I think our kids' generation are much more aware of their feelings and verbalize their feelings 100 times more than you and I ever did.
Well, let's just put it this way: there's a lot more. The information is a lot more available nowadays. Like, if you just watch a couple of videos on Instagram, the feed's going to feed you a ton of stuff from really great therapists and people, right? Like, that didn't exist when we were kids. There's a lot more classes and there's a lot more things. So the awareness is at an all-time high. But why this is not a part of like the public school system or something you're taught to kids is mind-boggling to me. Because it would change the dynamic of so many freaking things in the world. It would change the dynamic of relationships. I'm convinced the divorce rate in this country would be way less if at a young age we were taught proper communication. We were taught simple things like what active listening actually is. If we were taught that the way you see the world is just one way of literally a billion ways, and it's not true. Like, these simple concepts that a lot of adults don't even know, don't even understand, they can't comprehend. If you were taught as a kid this stuff, it would change the dynamic of the entire world.
Literally, what you just said is the reason why I opened my own business. Literally that. Because I also see how that would change the entire fabric of society, and it would change the world we live in.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. And so, again, I don't know how we got onto this topic, but if anyone in the public school system listening, like, get on it. I wanted to move. There's like deep lessons and there's like surface level lessons. So can we just get some of these surface level lessons out of the way and we can go to the depths? Okay. The first one is this: sweeping things under the rug. It just buys you time, but it actually makes the problem worse. So don't do that. Okay. Just have the hard conversations and don't sweep things under the rug. And like, I think things grow while they're under the rug. And so, and then be someone who can like listen, and active listening is amazing. That's, and there's a difference between just sitting there and being quiet while the person speaks and sitting there being quiet, trying to understand their perspective on what they're saying without your letting your ego or arrogance or righteousness come in. Okay. So that's number one. Anything to add on to that one?
That's surface level. I feel like that's really deep.
Really?
Well, I mean, easier said than done.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard.
I don't know. After this year, I feel like some of this stuff is pretty easy. Maybe a year ago it would have been hard.
We practiced a lot.
Yeah. Here's one that was a really big lesson for me, is that I remember, this was just in September, and it was like in the middle of the move, going through, divorce process, some issues happening in the business with students. Business was slowing down. Like people needed to leave on the team. Like, I was kind of avoiding hard conversations with people on the team. Got diagnosed with 2 different medical issues, and it sent me into a tailspin. And I remember sending my buddy Jim a message and being like, dude, I can't do this anymore. And he's like, what do you mean? I'm like, life, I just can't do it. I'm so overloaded right now. I don't even know what to do. God, I'm getting teary-eyed thinking about it. It was like, and I haven't even been hit by the car yet. Had I known that was coming, I would have been like, I would have just run to the mountains and hid in a cave and just said like, I'm done. So my system was completely overloaded, and I could not handle one more thing. And it was a blessing now that I look back on it, because it forced me to learn how to let go and lose attachments. And it was like, if the business goes down, the business goes down. If I lose all my money, I lose all my money. If I do whatever, I can't keep holding on. Like my grip is I'm white knuckling right now. And he told me, look, the reason why it feels overloaded is because the mind wants to figure out solutions when there's a problem. And he said, and when the mind is constantly can't figure out a solution to any problem and it overloads your system. So he said, you need to compartmentalize and you need to focus on one thing at a time. He said, not everything needs to be solved at one moment. When you can focus on one thing, the mind focuses on one thing, it calms your system down, because you're not trying to put out 20 fires, you're trying to put out one. So if you can get comfortable with knowing that there are fires burning, and it's okay that they're burning, and you can focus your attention on the most immediate one that needs to get solved, you will instantly feel better. And that's exactly what happened. And there were also moments where I was so unclear and so confused, and my thinking was so all over the place that I did not have clarity on some really big decisions that I needed to make. And not only that, but Fiona has been an amazing mentor through this too, who was, I guess, a relationship coach or therapist during this. I mean, she's unbelievable. And so she said almost the exact same thing as Jim. And she just said, Brandon, can you just sit in the confusion? She's like, I, to this day, have never had a client who had never found clarity on the questions that they want. Sometimes it just doesn't happen in the time that you want it to happen. Can you sit in that uncomfortableness of not knowing and make the confusion and the lack of clarity just a normal thing? And she's like, I promise the clarity will come in when the clarity is supposed to come in. It always does. And she talks a lot about, very similar to what you said about wisdom. And she's like, that's what wisdom is. Wisdom will come in the perfect moment when it needs to come in. It always does, and it never fails. And if it doesn't come in yet, it's because it wasn't time for it to come in yet. So just focus on one thing at a time, sit in the confusion, and the clarity will come. And that was a really big lesson for me, because I think, especially as entrepreneurs, we are problem solvers. We want to fix things. And especially for me, I realized I was kind of a martyr or savior in my relationship, which was, very damaging. And I never saw that. I always thought like, I'm doing good. Like I'm taking care of everything. And I was like, that was actually pretty damaging. I never saw that, And so for me, and I'm sure many entrepreneurs are the same way, where you just want to get in and fix. And that can overload your system when you have 20 fires on your plate all of a sudden. Does that make sense? Did I explain that?
Yes, you did. And I think this is even beyond entrepreneurs. This is human nature. We want to know, because we want certainty. Is it left or is it right? We want to know, is it black or is it white? Which one? Because then we can plan, then we can take action, which is, this makes us feel like we have some control. So it's human nature to want to know the answer. What should I do? Should I do A or should I do B? And sitting in that discomfort, sitting in ambiguity is counterintuitive to all of us. However, the more comfortable we can be in that, knowing that a resolution will come. It will come, but it's just not here yet. And being okay, not being okay is the lesson, right? That's also, it also ties into what you were saying in the beginning about hurt, because part of that understanding of hurt and pain is being able to experience it. Just feel hurt, feel pain, feel the ambiguity, feel the uncertainty, and know it's not going to kill you. It's not going to crush you. It's very uncomfortable. But I think what we always try to do, and what we've been conditioned to do, is just feel the good feelings, feel the happy, feel the joy, but don't feel all this other stuff that's uncomfortable. Just like push that away somehow. And that doesn't work. You can't do that, because feelings don't work that way. If you dial down pain, you also dial down joy. So even though I know that in large part this year has been extremely painful in many ways, but the upside of that is that because you let yourself be in the ambiguity, you let yourself be in the uncertainty, you let yourself feel it, you will also, therefore, allow yourself to feel the high highs that inevitably are coming.
Well, and that's what one of the things I realized is like everyone always wants the depth in a relationship, and everyone always wants the partner, the connectedness to just go to those levels. And it's like, you don't achieve that without pain. You just don't. There's no way that is it's like a pendulum. It's like if you want the highest, most beautifulest relationship that no one ever gets to experience, or very few people get to experience, guess what? You're going to have to go through a lot of pain that most people will never want to go through. And so you have a very surface level relationship that's built off of comfort and convenience, or, and that's just going to be very mediocre. There's not really a lot of pain. There's probably frustration and things like that. But at the same time, you don't experience the depth of love. But when you go to fucking hell with someone and you can come out the other side with it, you get to experience a new level of love that most people never get to experience. And so, and that's been, something that I think I don't know what the future holds, but I know both for both of us, in future relationships, the pain that we've gone through are probably going to allow us to be able to go deeper with whoever we're with, or however it works out. I don't know, but it's like, there is no depth without pain. It just doesn't exist. There's no way.
Right. Just like, we say in other contexts, we say there is no light without darkness, right? It's the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And this brings me to the next lesson, which is the power of thought in your thinking. And so this is also a big thing that I've learned, through Fiona. And again, this was even with all the work that I've done, it still have never learned this lesson. This is something that should be taught in school. But when you are in a state of emotion, and it could be good emotion, bad emotion, happy and highs, and it could be lows and lows. But when you're in these extreme emotions, there is no clarity. Your thinking is distorted. And so, I think more when you're in a good state, your thinking's probably more in a good place. But that can also lead to like overcommitting to things and being like, oh yeah, and blah, 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 blah. And like very excited and yeah, let's do that. And it's just like your thinking's not very clear. And same thing. And when you're in anger and frustration and hurt, your thinking is distorted, and all logic, it goes out the window. And I guess, most people you might call this fight or flight as well, when you're in fight or flight. And if you are constantly in fight or flight, your thinking is distorted. There is no logic. It's all emotionally based. And so when you want repair in a relationship or a friendship or whatever it may be, you have to really develop the muscle of recognizing I'm in a deep emotional state. My thinking is not clear. We need to stop until the thinking is clear, and we can come back when we're both at a calm state. And that's when progress and movement and repair can happen.
Right.
And I've been pretty bad at that, to be honest with you. Like, because I'm the type of person that like wants to fix the fucking problem. And so it's like, I had to learn that there is no fixing a problem when one or both of you are in high emotional states. It's impossible. It just doesn't happen.
Right. But in order to learn that lesson that it's impossible in that moment to fix or to repair, so to speak, you had to first learn, I can be in this state of ambiguity. I can be in this uncertain place where there is no resolution yet, and know that I'm going to be okay, right? I can be in the eye of the storm while it's still happening, and I'm going to be okay. To your point of this should be taught in school, it is taught in school. It's called the school of life, because this is not a lesson to be taught in the mind. This is not a logical, this is a lesson to be experienced in your body.
Yeah.
Right? This is not something somebody can stand up, a big grown-up can stand up on a stage and teach a young child. This is something you have to experience.
Yep. And then take it one step deeper. This was like, I mean, this I think was one of the biggest lessons that I learned in Fiona. I really need to plug her if anyone like needs help with relationships. I think her last name is spelled Lukeis or something like that. Fiona Lucas or something. She's in Australia. I mean, if you want someone to help navigate your relationship, like I cannot recommend anyone more than her. But the biggest like aha that she gave me, which was already after the decision of divorce, but I continue to work with her because I'm like, I don't understand how things went. So I don't understand how we got here. And so I continued to work with her. And our last conversation that we had, which again, I'm still talking with her throughout this whole process, but one of the biggest ahas and like mic drop moments she told me was, Brandon, you got to understand, like, because we're talking about your thinking and your thought and the clarity and all this stuff. And she said, you're not in a relationship with the person that you think you're in a relationship with. And I was like, I don't understand what you mean. She's like, you're in a relationship of the thinking of that person.
Right. So another way to say that is how I see that is we live in this house of mirrors. And you know how you go in a house of mirrors, like in the circus or whatever, and one mirror shows you fat and one mirror shows you like super skinny and distorted, right? Like every mirror shows you like really distorted. That is how we live through relationships. So every person you're in a relationship with reflects part of you back to you. And you're in a relationship with that reflection.
Yes. Right. I don't see how I understand what you're saying, but I don't see the correlation between that and your thinking of the person.
Because your thinking is your perception.
Okay. Got it.
What you think when you and I have a relationship, whatever it is you see in me, whatever it is, whoever it is you think I am, is a part of you that I remind you of.
Well, I've also heard that it's the same thing with judgment. When you have judgment on someone else, it has nothing to do with the person. It has to do everything to do with your insecurity.
Right.
So like,
so let's say if you judge someone for a certain behavior that you don't like,
right,
there's a part of you that behaves that way that you don't like.
Right. Yes. Or the way I've heard it explained was that you're insecure about that. So like, let's say you go to a restaurant and like someone is rude to the waiter and you judge the person for that. And the way it was explained to me was like, the reason why you're judging that person is because if you did that, you would feel embarrassed. There's an insecurity there with you, which is why you're judging that person. Does that make sense?
It does, but that's not necessarily why. So let's say if you observe someone being rude, yeah, you're sitting at a table in a restaurant. One of the people at the table is very rude to the waiter, and that triggers you. So first of all, obviously it's not nice to be rude, right? we can all understand that that is not acceptable behavior. It's not nice behavior, but it doesn't mean it has to trigger us.
Right.
Right? So we're only looking at the time when it triggers us and we're like, F that asshole. Why are they talking that way to the waiter? That's not okay, right? That interaction lives inside of you.
Yes.
There's an interaction like that where someone was disrespectful, rude, minimizing, dismissing. However it is you experience that rudeness, that lives inside of you because it's a part of your experience too.
Well, yeah, and that brings me to, like, this wasn't even a lesson that I had written down, but that's what a trigger is. A trigger is an unhealed part of you. And I don't think people get that. It's like, one of the things I learned this year, I kind of already knew it, but I experienced it on a different level, is that your triggers are clear signs of unresolved issues that you have with yourself. And what most people do, instead of looking at yourself and healing that part or facing that part, what you want to do, you try to do, is you control the external environment so that the triggers don't exist anymore. And it's like, hold on. That's fucking exhausting and will never work. You can't control the external environment. So you can't control, like, trying to control the external environment, trying to control your spouse or what they do and this and that. So
trying to get your kids to listen so that you don't yell.
Trying to get your kids to listen, or trying to get your friends to show up the way you want them to show up because it triggers you when they don't show up the way you want them to show up. Like, why do I always have to call that person? Why can't they call me? And blah, 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 blah. That bullshit, like that sort of stuff, these triggers that you have, instead of trying to get everyone to conform to what you want so you're not triggered anymore, it's so much easier. Like, I'm not going to say it's easier, but the root cause of it is because you have an unhealed part of you that you don't want to look at. And hold on real quick, because I'm looking at the last piece. It's very destructive when you try to control the external environment and other people so that they don't trigger you anymore. That is when relationships fall apart.
100%.
Everything.
Yes, it's destructive to the relationships. It's also disempowering, right? Because you're giving your power away to some external, right? So that hurts you double.
Right.
One time because you got triggered, and another time because you gave your power away.
Right.
So you double hurt yourself. I think part of why this is tricky is because I think people sometimes have a hard time separating between the fact that someone may have behaved in a way that's not okay, right? The person who was rude to the waiter, that's not okay. But we have to separate between that behavior is not okay and the fact that I got triggered by it. I can say, listen, your behavior is not acceptable to me, or, I'm just not going to engage with this kind of behavior and not be triggered by it.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Like, things can happen and that you don't agree with, or you didn't like, you're like, I don't know if that's right or wrong. And we can get a whole discussion on what right or wrong even is, but we should invite Matt for that conversation.
We go round in circles into 1 a.m. Yes.
Yeah. But I think, what we're talking about is the emotional response to the event that's happening. And so, yeah, that's really powerful. But I do want to bring it back real quick to what led us to here, which is like, you're not in a relationship with a person. You're in a relationship of your thinking of that person. And this was like mind-blowing shifting for me, because I already understood the concept of like, your perception is your reality, and you can shift your perception to completely alter your reality. And I've already understood that, but to then recognize that my thoughts aren't me. They are not wisdom, really. They're not downloads. They're just thinking, and you can change the thinking of the person you're in a relationship with. It is so powerful that it will completely transform any relationship that you ever have with any person.
So talk a little bit about how do you shift the thinking? Because if I think you're an asshole, How am I going to shift that?
It comes down to awareness, I think, first. Awareness is the key. Nothing can change unless you have the awareness. So I'm going to just use you as an example, right? And I'm just going to create a hypothetical here. So this is not true. Don't start crying because this is not a true statement, okay? But if, let's say, because I'm assuming most people know, but you're the COO of our company, right? You're the quote unquote integrator or the operations person you're the number 2 in the company. And if you, like, let's just say you started making decisions about stuff that were like vision, right? You kept doing all this stuff about vision and like, well, that's my role. And I started to like have resentment and all these things build up. And I'm like, I really don't like Rachel and blah, 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 blah. She's controlling and she's this and she's that and blah, 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 right? And I start to recognize, wow, my thinking is taking me down this rabbit hole. My thinking is causing me to look at Rachel in a really bad light. And I look at this and I go like, why is my thinking there? Like that because I'm thinking those thoughts, that now becomes the reality of our relationship in my eyes. The relationship I have is Rachel's controlling and she's taking over my role and da 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 da. And that's not going to lead to anything good, right? But so that takes awareness. You have to be aware that, wow, my thinking is taking me here. This may not be totally true. And then let's just say I have a conversation with you. And you're like, Brandon, you've been so overloaded this year that I wanted to take things off your plate and I want to make it easier on you. In that instant, my thinking changes and go, wow, Rachel is so compassionate. She's so loving. She cares about me. Nothing changed except my thinking towards you. And yes, you assisted me in changing that thinking, but sometimes you don't even need the person to assist you in changing your thinking. And actually, I would argue that you probably don't at all, ever. You're in control of the thinking you have towards that person. So then that's what molds the relationship that you're in. And so that's something that I got to experience very heavily this year. And again, it's always a really big challenge because there's more triggers and more depth and more whatever. But one of the things I got to experience this year was that, and this was just recent, like maybe a month or two ago, was that like, wow, I got to this point in my relationship and I viewed my relationship a very specific way because I wasn't aware that these thoughts were coming in and I was in a relationship of this thought pattern and I could have changed the thought pattern. And that was just so shifting. And again, this is not something that is very powerful just in romantic relationships, but any relationship with any human being.
Right. Yes, it does, because there was no part here where you said that I needed to change my behavior. Right. So in this entire scenario, my behavior was the same. All that changed was how you viewed my behavior.
Yes. And this is going to be, again, a little controversial, but it's the same thing with trauma. Why can two people go through the same experience and one views it as traumatic and the other person doesn't?
Right, because
it's interpretation. And so I'm convinced, and I'm not an expert in this, but I am convinced that when people go through trauma, the only reason why those events were traumatic is because they're viewing them as traumatic.
Yes. And just a little asterisk there. Some events are trauma, right? There is such a thing as going through a trauma, an event, right? Like a very traumatic event physically and
like
even
physical trauma.
Yes. So that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is when people, I know you and I talked about this example of when soldiers go to war, some of them return with PTSD and some of them do not. But they've gone through the same war. They've seen the same horrors. They've gone through the same struggle. Why do some come back with PTSD and some do not? Is because of how we're wired and our past experiences and how we interpret, perceive, absorb the things we go through.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I don't even know if it's unfortunately, but like when people have extreme victim mentality, more often than not, the perception or the thinking you'll have around an event is like, I was traumatized. This happened to me, blah, 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 blah. Right. And that actually leads me to my next lesson. And again, this might be, I want to tread lightly because this might be triggering to people, but people aren't doing things to you. And I think a lot of people think, oh, they're doing this to me and blah, 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 blah. There's always an underlying reason as to why people are doing what they do. And I do believe that if you're brave enough to explore and understand why someone's doing something, you can actually unlock the doors to peace and understanding. Does that make sense? Or do we need like an analogy, metaphor example on that?
So like I have an example with like between parents and kids, because I see this a lot of times with parents where they feel like their children are tantruming or exploding or being annoying. And their experience is, my kid is doing this to me. And one way to shift out of that in this context, so I have a client whose child is, you know, how some kids are like just crazy sensitive to like tags and stuff on their skin, how clothes feel. This kid is like that, like at a very extreme level. And the mom can't understand it because the mom is not like that. None of the other kids are like that. And it's at a point where the mom experiences it as like over dramatic, overreacting, over dramatic. Why is she always doing this? And we had to shift that to, she's not doing this to you. This is happening to her. It's happening to her that she's uncomfortable just wearing a freaking t-shirt or a pair of socks. But that experience, that basic experience, is so uncomfortable to her that she can't even go throughout her day. So she's not doing anything to you. Actually, something is happening to her, and she's all alone in that experience. And that was the penny that dropped for this mom to see, okay, this is not about me.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. It can unlock the doors to peace and understanding, because instead of being so, I guess, triggered or like upset that your child is behaving this way, and you realize my child isn't doing something to me. They're going through their own, they're going through their own battle.
Yeah.
And when you then are brave enough to dive into what is their battle, and you get a deeper understanding of it, again, it goes back to what we said. It changes your thinking of that person. It changes your relationship. And then all of a sudden you feel understanding and you feel peace because you move out of the victimhood of this person's doing something to me. Like, they're not doing anything.
This reminds me, a few years ago, I was skiing with my daughter, Mia. Mm-hmm. Now, anybody who's ever seen me ski knows I am not a good skier. Okay. I am maybe like on a great day, I'm a good beginner. I have no business helping anybody else ski, but certainly not teaching anybody to ski. But for whatever reason, she and I are going down the mountain. It's the end of the day. We were by ourselves. I forget where my husband and my boys were, but it was just me and her. And we were going down this run that is like, it's long. It's like, I don't know, 1.5 miles long, all the way down the mountain. So we're kind of halfway down, and she's, you know, that moment where your legs are like, done. I'm done. Can't go another step. That's it. I'm done. She reached that point halfway down the mountain now. And it's like snowing and it's cold and she's exhausted. And she says to me, she wants me to pick her up and ski like that with her in just the thought of that. I'm like, okay, no, I'm going to get both of us killed.
Yeah.
So I said to her, listen, I can't do that. Like, that's a hard no. And she started crying because my husband would do that because he can do that. He's a great skier. He's way stronger than I am too. So like for him, it would not be a big deal to hold her and ski down the mountain. He would have done that. So she started crying. And meanwhile, I'm like, you know that moment where you're sweating like head to toe, just everything in my ski gear. The snow's coming down. I'm like, oh my God, we have like almost a whole mile to go down. What am I going to do? And I had to like take a breath and say, okay, Rachel, she is having a really hard time right now. She cannot imagine how she gets down the mountain. And that must be really scary. So I just got to take a breath. And I told her, listen, Mia, I can't pick you up. It's dangerous because I'm not a good enough skier for that. We're going to go together. We're going to go as slow as we need to go. Doesn't matter how long it takes us. We'll get there together. I'll ski with you. I won't go too fast. You'll set the pace. Whenever you want a break, we'll take a break. And we're just going to do it together. We get down the mountain. We're going to have a hot cocoa with an extra whipped cream. And for both of us.
You bribed her with sugar.
No, I didn't, because she was like, she doesn't even care about the hot cocoa. It was for me. I was bribing myself. I was like, Rachel, if you can get down the mountain.
I'm going to have a hot cocoa when we get down
right.
the mountain.
And you can watch me.
Yeah.
But that's what we did. And I don't know how long it took us. We took 1 million breaks and we got down finally. And that was my moment of needing to say, you know what? She's having a hard experience. So either I can yell at her or do something, and well, what's that going to accomplish? We're still stuck here in the middle of this long run. Or I can try to understand what she's going through and meet her there.
I mean, that's such a powerful place to be. And it takes it's a muscle that needs to be developed to like snap yourself out of your own thoughts and feelings and stuff and to tap into somebody else's. And when you do, it's just, I do feel like that's when like that's where depth comes from. That's where connection comes from. That's where feeling heard and validated to be like.
Do you know what I thought of in that moment when I was like, the moment that flipped it for me on the ski run is, how many times have you had this experience as a parent where it's just too much? Everything is too much and you just want to cry. And you're all by yourself in that moment where you literally, I can't do anything. That's it. I'm done. And she was having that moment. And I was like, when I have those moments, I just want someone to be with me and take me by the hand and say, it's going to be okay. We'll go one step at a time.
Okay. So I'm sure you recognize this, but what's beautiful in what you're describing is those moments that you felt what she was feeling. Those moments were painful. They were excruciating. They were triggering. They were all of these things. But instead of being victim to those things, you learn from that and you tapped into that experience to allow you to have a deeper understanding of what someone else was going through. And that's the beauty of a lot of these experiences that we go through is, you will never understand what someone's going through unless you're actually experiencing it on some level. And so we have these painful experiences that we go through and no one wants to go through them, but it allows you to have a deeper understanding of people. And not to tie this all back into business because it's not what this is about, but even with messaging, it's like the people that are speaking from experience with their messaging are able to get faster, better, deeper, longer, better results because they have the actual experience to know how to communicate it. And the same thing as a parent or a partner or in a relationship, when you get to go through these painful moments, it's such a gift because it allows you to operate with more compassion, be more grounded. If you choose to. Some people choose to never learn the lesson and they just like stay victim and blame everyone else and do whatever. But if you choose to learn from it, it allows you to just experience so much peace, understanding, and depth in everyone and all the relationships around you. And I think that's a beautiful story. I mean, and
it allowed me to show up for her in a way that I wish someone, some like hypothetical parent in that moment, even though I was a grown up, but somebody could have shown up for me, right? Or that, more importantly, that I could have shown up for myself as that parent, right?
I think that's so beautiful because there's so many people that like blame their parents for their childhood. And it's like, no, like why?
They're done. Your parents are done. They've done their job.
Yeah. And that person that was your parent, that person doesn't exist. I've seen it with my own parents and my in-laws and like all of that stuff is like the people that they were as parents are not the people they are. Those people don't exist anymore. They're gone. They don't exist anymore. But if we choose to look at our childhood as something that was like, actually a very beautiful experience because it brought us so much awareness that now we get to tap into to be better parents. Because I do believe that myself and Jacqueline would not be the parents we were today had we not had the childhood we had. And because we had the childhood that we had, it allows us to tap into I am going to show up in such a different way for my kids on the like quote unquote bad stuff. Like obviously we hear a lot of the good stuff too, which is really great. But I think because we went through those experiences, it allows us to show up on deeper, better levels. And it's actually a beautiful thing because it causes more peace with every generation to come.
Right. And if you can also show up in that way for yourself today, because we still have those needs and wants, right? We still have those moments where we need someone to show up for us, where we want someone to show up for us. But as opposed to when we were kids, now we can do that for ourselves, right? So this is back to if you love yourself and you can show up for yourself, you can also love, feel compassion, and show up for the people in your life.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love it. I want to move into another lesson, and this is going to be another touchy subject. So as a listener, be prepared. One of the things that I've realized this year has to do with boundaries, and that we need boundaries, but we also have to be careful with boundaries. Because sometimes I think people use boundaries as an excuse to not grow and to control others. And so I'm trying to think of an example that I can roll with here, but it would I guess maybe I'll just make an example up with you. So it'd be like, if you told me something like, Brandon, here's what the business needs, and here's what the business needs, and here's what the business needs, and it sends me into a state of overload. And I said, you know what, Rachel, I don't want to hear what the business needs anymore. This is a boundary I'm putting into place. That is me avoiding the hard work of looking at what the business actually needs. And so I think sometimes people will put boundaries in place to be like, I don't want you to do this anymore. That's my boundary. And it's like, no. A boundary is what people do to you. A boundary is not for you to control what other people do. And that's one aspect. But the other aspect of it is, if you're trying to put boundaries in place to avoid looking at your triggers, you have to be very careful with that, because it's going to kill all growth. And if you're fine killing all growth, that's fine too. Like, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's no, like, you're just going to keep running the same cycles over and over again. And if you're okay with that, then so be it. But does that make sense? I explained that okay? Do you want to expand on that?
I think people perceive boundaries as, here's the line and you can't cross that line. I'm putting down my line. This is my red line in the sand. You can't cross it. And what you're saying is, you can't control what other people do. So that's not how to set a boundary. That's an incorrect way to set a boundary, which all of us have grown up with, right? All of us have grown up with the notion that that's what a boundary means. I tell you, here's my line and you don't cross it. And now what? Now I sit here and cross my fingers that you really don't cross it? Instead, how we should look at boundaries is, what am I willing or not willing to engage in? That's my boundary. Because that's the only person I control is me on a good day, right? So I decide, okay, this is a behavior that I'm not willing to engage with. So I know you and I talked about this a while ago. I told you the example of my husband used to tease me in the beginning of our relationship. And the way he teased me was really, I experienced it as being mean, and I didn't like it. And I told him, this is not teasing. This is just mean. So I'm not willing to engage in this. That was my boundary. You can do whatever you want. You can continue teasing in that way. I just want you to understand, I'm not engaging in that. I'm not going to be in a relationship like that. But you do you, right? So lucky for us, he changed, like, immediately, dropped it, never heard from that again. It's been 20 years. Right. But the boundary was not, you stop teasing me. The boundary was about me. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm okay with. And now you have a choice, and I also have a choice, right? So we all need to understand, and this is, of course, actions do have consequences, right? We're not saying they don't have consequences, right? But if you continue to tease me, I'm just letting you, there's not an ultimatum. It's not a threat. I'm just telling you, where it's going to lead ultimately. And now you choose what you're going to do, and I'm going to choose what I do.
Right. Yeah. And I think, playing with your scenario, I think sometimes people will use boundaries to control someone else. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say your husband was teasing other people and you were like, that embarrasses me. I don't like that. My boundary is that I'm not going to, you can't do that anymore because this is the way it makes me feel. And in my opinion, that's a misuse of boundary, because you're using boundaries to control someone else's behavior when it has nothing to do with you, because you just don't like it. So I think a lot of people will use boundaries to control things that they don't like. And it has nothing to do with controlling things you don't like. It has you understanding what you're willing, like you said, to engage with or deal with when it's happening directly to you. If something isn't happening directly to you, I'm sorry, but that's not a boundary. You're using boundaries as a method to control someone else.
Totally. And sometimes I think people see boundaries as a way to keep people out. And I view it the other way around. It's the way to bring people in. I'm telling you, my boundary was, at that time, my boundary with my husband was about teasing. The fact that he changed his behavior brought him in, right? It allowed him to get closer to me, not push him away. That was the purpose of the boundary, is to say, hey, this hurts me, but I want you to come in to this safe space that is closer to me without the teasing, right? If you leave the teasing at the door, then you can come in closer.
Yes. And see, this opens up another whole can of worms, because not even a can of worms. It's just like, there's so many ways we can go with this, because also looking at him, he had the emotional intelligence. He could have looked at that and said, like, this is not a big deal. It's just a teasing. My intention was not anything, whatever. I'm just going to keep doing it. But he had to move out of his perspective to go into, like, okay, this is causing hurt, which goes back into what we had talked about earlier today. Like, it brings hurt to this person, whether that was my intention or not. And I'm going to listen, and I'm going to change. But at the same time, one of the other lessons too is I do think that not everything is black and white. And I think rigidity and looking at everything as black and white, right and wrong, causes a lot of problems as well, because there's a lot of gray areas. And he could have had an opportunity to come to you and say, like, look, this is playful to me, and it's really how I show intimacy. And this is really, is there a way for me?
I literally said that. This is how we show love in my family.
Yeah, I get it, because I'm kind of the same way, right? Like playful teasing. And so he could have had that moment of saying, like, look, I get this is your boundary, and I did not understand that this was crossing it, but, like, this is also how I show up. And then you guys can come up with a compromise. You can come up with, like, I get that. I can see that. Here's where it turns from fun to hurt for me. And then you guys can work together on finding a solution. And I think that is absolutely vital to a relationship, when you both understand what is really important to the other person. And then you can compromise, and not so much of, you need to do this. It's black or white. This is the way it is. And without the compromise, without the gray area, without the whatever. And I do think when you're black and white and rigid, it is a form of control. And so even if you have that strong boundary, there's flexibility there. There's always flexibility and compromise and open communication to figure out, and this is another big lesson is like, if you really want to save a relationship, I think sometimes you really have to look at it as, it's not me and you against each other. It's me and you against the problem. And if you can't get there, then it causes a lot of damage. And so, like in the scenario with you and the boundary, it's like, if he came to you and said, like, okay, we're at a problem right now because I like the teasing. This is how I show intimacy. You don't like it. This is me and you against the problem. Let's find the way to move forward. And if that was really important to him, that would be the way to move forward and keep a healthy relationship. But it probably wasn't that big of a deal to him, and he just dropped it and understood your hurt, and it was a very easy thing. But there are multiple ways to handle stuff like that.
Right. And so interestingly, because he dropped it, ultimately, here we are 20 years later, right? I also was able to drop my rigidity because I was being rigid too. And here we are 20 years later, he totally teases me now. And it is playful. And I don't mind it because I've also relaxed because because I allowed him in, it was safe to be in the relationship. Now that we have this established relationship, when he teases me, I perceive it as safe. Whereas at the beginning of the relationship, the safety wasn't established yet. So it wasn't safe for him to tease me. But now because I let him in and it is safe, now I don't care.
Right. Yeah. Because you know the intention behind it. It's like, this is,
exactly.
Whatever.
Exactly. I don't have to question the intention. I don't have to, exactly. Yeah. So now I can be playful with it too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we hit all of my lessons. We did an hour and 20 minutes. I'm sure there's more. Let me just go through my list here just to make sure. Yeah, I mean, I think we hit most. I mean, some of the lessons I wrote down, we've already sort of covered and experienced, or not experienced, but have gone through. So I don't know. Is there anything else that you want to dive into or think that is important to say?
I want to end it with another life lesson. One that not necessarily was learned this year by anyone, but that we should remember. And that is forgiveness. Mm. Forgiveness for what happened, for the fact that things happened how they happened, that people behaved in the way they behaved, and therefore set forth a chain of events that ended the way it ended. And just accepting that that is what happened and releasing the desire that it would have happened otherwise, that things would have turned out a different way. Just being where we are, as is, accepting our reality and just forgiving life that it turned out the way it turned out.
Yeah. And that includes forgiving yourself.
Yes.
And I think that's, a lesson that I'm learning and still in the process of doing, because, as I go through the aftermath of everything of this year, it's like, everything that happened this year has a rippling effect on everyone else, our family, brothers, sisters, parents, in-laws on both sides, children. And it's hard, it's like, when something major like this happens, and again, it doesn't have to be just divorce. I'm witnessing it in multiple areas. The election and the politics have caused pretty big riffles in my family, as you know. So it's that, but also like there's been unresolved or untalked about issues years ago in my family, and then when there was a near-death experience with my dad, it caused a lot of stuff to come up with some of my brothers and whatever. It's like their own issues, but everything that you are going to go through, it has an effect on everyone. And then when you start to see people like crying and being hurt by things that you're going through as well, it's like at least for me, it felt like a lot of weight on my shoulders that I have to release and like just forgive myself for my role in everything. And so like, I know I've had a very big role in everything that happened and why I'm here where I am. And like, when you look back at that and you see the rippling effects of that, it's like, it takes a couple layers. Like at first you have to have the awareness that you had a role, right? And you have to understand the hurt that you brought, and you have to understand that like, even though it wasn't your intention, that's still there. And then that hurt has a rippling effect on everyone around you. And I think this is why sometimes people have a hard time accepting responsibility and because in order to accept responsibility for your role, you also have to take responsibility that hurt a lot of people.
Yes. And that can often bump up against your identity.
Yes. And I battled that because it was like,
Sure.
it took me a long time to just see that I brought hurt to people, even though it wasn't my intention. And even though the way I see myself is a very good guy who, and a great provider and a great father and a great husband and all of these things, the fact of the matter is like, I still did things that hurt people, and everyone listening, you do the same thing. Everyone, like, there's no way you can go through life without bringing hurt to other people. There's just no way you're going to do that. And that hurt is going to have rippling effects. And I do believe that it is so hard for people to understand that they will never accept responsibility, so they don't have to face that shame and guilt and whatever. And then forgiveness is the way to release it.
Right. Because people have a hard time holding, how could I be good and also hurt someone?
Well, okay, the episode's not done because that's another lesson that I learned this year. So we're like in the concert, right? When the concert ends and they go, the people go
Encore.
it's like encore time. But that was actually a big lesson for me, is that two different things can coexist at the exact same time.
And they don't contradict.
And they don't contradict. So you can be mad and still love. You can be hurt and still love. You can be angry and still be respectful. You can, like, both of you can be wrong and both of you can be right. You know, it's like there is no one. Again, it goes back to rigidity. It's not black and white. It's emotions can coexist at the exact same time.
Yes. And they do, right? We are good. We are. All the people in your life, you and all the people in your life are good people. And we hurt each other.
Yes. Yep.
And the sooner we can release the resistance to that fact, the more peace we can bring on ourselves.
Yeah.
Even when I hurt you, it doesn't negate my goodness.
Right.
It means I hurt you. It means I need to take accountability. It means maybe I made a mistake, but it doesn't negate my goodness, because nothing can. Nothing can add to my goodness and nothing can take away from it. It's untouchable.
Well, and it goes to another lesson I learned this year, which is everyone is perfect just the way they are. And that's the amazing thing about this universe, is that everything happens the way exactly how it needs to happen, and people are exactly the way they need to be. And it's this beautiful, amazing symphony. There you go. I kept trying to go to sympathy. That's where my mind was going. Or this beautiful orchestra that's just always learning. And I do believe that it's always moving and maneuvering in a way to bring evolution, and evolution for everyone. And it's like, evolution can be painful, but when you realize that the way you are, or the way you show up, even though you may experience it as shame, it is exactly what needed to happen in the way it needed to happen. And it was fucking perfect the way that it happened, because that's the way it happened. And that's the way the universe or God, whoever, needed it to happen, so that everyone could have that experience that they needed to help with some sort of evolution in some way.
Right. And this isn't, and you know, when you say everyone is perfect, I think another way to look at that is, you're good enough right now, as you are. This isn't to say that you personally, because this is part of who you are, you continue to seek your own evolution. You continue to seek understanding yourself at deeper levels. You continue to seek understanding those around you at deeper levels. But none of that makes you better, because you're already enough.
Yes. Well, and I think, to really grasp what I was saying, is like, everything is perfect, is you have to redefine what perfect is. Because I think people have this idea that perfect is no mistakes. Perfect is all good. perfect is, whatever. And that doesn't exist. That the definition, that stereotypical definition of what perfect is, literally doesn't exist. No one does that. Nothing does that ever. Nothing is perfect according to the, I guess, traditional sense. But if you really look at perfect as it happened exactly the way it needed to happen, and the ultimate goal is evolution and growth, and that's the goal, everything is happening perfectly the way it is to lead to evolution. And here's the proof in it. The proof in it is if you look back at who you were 10 years ago and you look at who you are today, you're not going to recognize who you are. And in most cases, it's someone that has been learning and someone that's been growing and changing and adjusting, and someone who's been going through life lessons to evolve. I mean, and I hope I'm right in saying that, I guess, even, but that has been my experience, is that the idea of perfect is that everything happens the way it needs to happen to lead to growth in everyone around.
If that is true, if you make it your mission to alchemize the pain that you went through for that purpose of growth, right? Because not everybody does that. Some people go through the muck and they stay in the muck. They stay in the pain. They stay in the struggle. They stay in the victimhood. We all go through these low lows and these extremely painful periods in our lives and painful experiences, all of us. And all of us will, right? Nobody's going to get out of this life without experiencing extreme emotional pain and suffering. The question is, what do we do with that, right? And so for me, when I've gone through those periods in my life, each time I have made a conscious decision, this is going to be worth it because I'm going to make it worth it. That's up to me. That is fully in my control. I am going to alchemize this pain of divorce, illness, whatever, heartbreak, whatever I've gone through in my life that all of us go through. I'm going to alchemize that for my growth.
Yeah. But I would even argue that someone can still stay in victimhood and still see growth.
Expand.
Okay. So I'm just going to try to create a hypothetical here. So, and they will grow. So, okay, here's one way to look at it. Let's say you're in a relationship, or a romantic relationship, and the person always teases you when you go out into public or whatever, and they humiliate you in front of a group of people, right? And you're always like, I can't believe this person, and blah, 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 and all this hurt, and they did this to me, and whatever. I think on some level, moving forward with a relationship, it at least brought them awareness of something they don't like. And I think that even if you choose to stay in victimhood and not really alchemize the lesson in the way that will lead to ultimate growth, I think it at least brings some level of awareness. And that level of awareness is always going to be the first step of growth. And even that person, even in that instance, so remember, that's just one experience that person had. There's going to be a million other experiences they have that's still going to be lead to growth. Like I guess what I'm saying is that, like, no person is exactly who they were a year ago and 5 years ago and 10 years ago because of what they go through in life. And it always leads to growth. And that's why life is always happening perfectly the way it is. And maybe it's not their time in this lifetime to learn that big, huge lesson right in this moment. And my belief is that we do have multiple lives and past lives. It's like, I do think that experience still lives within their soul that will benefit them in the future life. So we can't look at the growth as a singular life, and I had this conversation with James one time, and it's like, one of the things that we talked about was like things that come naturally to us or things we just get or understand. I really do believe was because we've already truly mastered that lesson in a past life. And so it comes very easily to us. We just pick it up because we've already mastered that lesson. And so I think that if we look at it from multiple lives. And we can get into a whole conversation of just like how, and you and I have, which about time and how time is now and present, and there is no present and future, and it's multiple dimensions. And that's another podcast for another episode. But I think that's what I mean is like everything's happening perfectly the way it needs to happen, even if you don't turn it into or alchemize it into the maximum amount. Does that make sense?
Totally. And you're absolutely right. We change no matter what. That's actually the one thing we can't stop is change. And you're right. Some people are actively seeking change. So yes, they will change more or faster or in a specific direction. But yes, I 100% agree with
that. But even, and we can't judge someone for not moving or growing the same level as us. And someone can't judge us for we don't grow as fast as them. Because what's going to happen is like, you're going to separate if people are not growing together and they're not changing, but it doesn't make someone good or bad. But what it does is like, well, then that person's going to grow and change to who they need to be for the next person. And they are exactly who they need to be for that next person. And that's a beautiful thing, I think.
Right. And it's not true that, a lot of times I think people are under the perception that I'm the only one who's changing, right? People feel that way. Especially people who are in this kind of world of looking at themselves and raising their own awareness and kind of doing the work.
I'm guilty of that.
And you know what? You're not the only one, honestly. And every time someone asks me, okay, when is my husband going to change? Because that's usually the question. Not when is my wife going to change? When is my husband going to change? And I always give the same answer. Any minute between now and never. Is when that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because you don't get to say that. And you don't even know what they are already changing. They're just not, you're just changing on different dimensions. So it appears to you, they're not following, right? I'm going in this direction. When are they going to follow? They're not. They might never follow, right? So that opens up a conversation of, okay, is that okay with me? Right? Can I accept that? And maybe the answer is yes and maybe no.
I think it is okay. And that's one of the lessons I had to learn is like what unconditional love is. And it's like loving someone for the things that you always despise. And I like really got myself to that place on a couple big issues, not only just with, in my marriage, but like, with my kids and my family members and my brothers. And like, it was a big lesson for me in this year is just accepting and loving people for who they are. And that requires a huge amount of releasing of judgment.
Yeah.
And my own.
See the beauty of how they are, exactly how they are.
Yeah.
Right. They don't, nobody, I think sometimes we misperceive our own change and our own evolution as now I'm better. This is back to our point from before. You're not better.
Not better than anyone. Yeah.
No, exactly. Once you can recognize, oh, yes, okay, maybe I'm on my own self-development journey and I raise my awareness and I do all these things and I listen to all these podcasts and I read all these books and I invest in courses or coaches or whatever it is, right? I've done all of that. You know what my husband has done? Zilch. And you know what? He's the most freaking amazing human being.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing with relationships is that I think, it's, and this is something I learned from Fiona is you guys, the personal development thing really, I don't think matters that much. Like you said, you and your husband is a perfect example. I think what it comes down to is if you guys can get yourself to a place to love the other person for exactly who they are and who they will become, and you learn to fall back in love with them every 5 to 10 years, because that is probably the period where it's going to cause change and that won't stop. Get yourself, and then you show up with equal levels of respect for there's no stopping you. And the one thing I learned from Fiona is you actually don't need anything in common with your spouse in order to have a successful marriage and relationship. One of the things I learned from her is you just need to enjoy each other's company and have fun. And that was one of the things, because it was like, I didn't have a lot of things in common. we just didn't. We were like really different people, but we had so much fun together, which is why we lasted from 16 years old to 40s, because we enjoyed each other's company and we just had fun together. And what I've learned, over the last year, especially maybe 2 years, is to love the parts that I used to not like so much, but also to love them so much because it introduced me to things I would have never been introduced to. Like, had I met someone that was exactly like me, I actually think that'd be really incredibly fucking boring. It would just be so boring. And like some of the things that are me, I just want to do just me. I don't want to do with somebody else. I don't want to share that with somebody else. But when you can embrace the differences in someone else, you get to experience life from a different perspective that you never would have. And I can just say right now, like, I've experienced music on a whole different level that I would have never done had I not been married to Jacqueline. And I would have appreciation for arts had I not done that. She introduced me to all of that and brought so much beauty into my life in that way. And I think a lot of people look at that as like a bad thing. We don't have things in common, da, 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 da. It's like, no, go learn about each other. Be curious about each other. What can you learn from this person? What depth can they bring to you? But that respect needs to be like both ways. And it's just like, can you guys go have fun together? Because that's all that matters at the end of the day.
100%. 100%.
And now we're ending the episode.
Now we're really ending.
Now we're really done. Rachel, I really appreciate you having this conversation with me. And every time we chat, I always learn so much. And I appreciate you, always giving me different perspectives, bringing me to different levels and opening up different layers to things I think I understand. And then you always seem to find a way to give me an aha. So I appreciate that. I appreciate you holding the space for this conversation. And I feel like this was like one of the most funnest episodes I've had. So thank you. And I appreciate you.
Thank you. And thank you for, you're always game for a deep conversation. And I can't say that about many people.
Yeah. I love it.
You are. Yeah, I know. But that's an amazing thing about you, is that, you are always game for it. You're always interested. You're always curious. You are very open-minded. You're very open-minded, Brandon. That's a very rare thing. And I think that is one of your biggest strengths.
Well, I appreciate that. I never viewed myself as being open-minded. I just know I like a lot of different things. And so I appreciate that. So,
and also I want to tell you that it's been, a real privilege to witness your growth in this last year. I know I've had kind of a front row seat to a lot of things, and you've done an incredible job. You've done an incredible job, and I can't wait to see what's next.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And, I'm excited to see where it brings us in business. So time will tell. 2025 is going to be a good year. All I can say, well, never mind. I'm not going to say that. It can't get any worse than 2024, but you know what? That's not true. So knock on wood. I just know that 2025 is going to be a great year, and I'm looking forward to it. And so thank you, Rachel, again. And thank you for everyone who listened. If you guys listened to the entire episode, I'm assuming it was, value adding for you. It was insightful for you. And I appreciate you guys listening. So hopefully you enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you all next week. Take care, everyone.
Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out another episode of the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, go below, hit the subscribe button, and make sure you click on that bell icon and get notified every time we drop a new episode. Now, if you're looking for the show notes, we have them linked underneath this video, as well as our social media handles and some links to free training and offers that we drop from time to time to help you guys even further. So go check those out if you're interested, and thank you so much for tuning in to the New Generation Entrepreneur Podcast.